Hi, in this video, I'm going to give you 2 tools and 7 tips to help you talk to your teenagers about pornography. Yeah, I know, you're probably thinking, why would I want to do that? It's going to be really awkward for me and even more awkward for them. Tip number 1 is just to acknowledge that this is going to be awkward. Don't try and make out like this is easy for you if it isn't. In fact, it might really help if you say, listen, this is really awkward for me, but this is really important to me. And so I want us to talk about it. Try and inject a little bit of humor at this point. I remember when my dad tried to sit down and talk to me about this stuff. It was a nightmare. Whatever you can do to kind of acknowledge the embarrassment and the awkwardness is going to go a long way, but it will also set the tone for the conversation, and that can help as well. Talking about tone, that's our second tip. Try and do whatever you can with your words, your facial expressions, your body language to avoid shaming your teenager. Don't even assume that they are looking at porn, but if they are, they need to feel that it's okay to talk about that without being read the riot act. So you need to try and create an environment where it's safe to talk about these kind of issues without them just feeling rubbish if they do talk about it. Now that might be difficult because actually inside you might be absolutely gutted or angry or all sorts of other emotions. But do your best to ban shame in this conversation because actually in the long run, you want to be able to keep talking about this. And so how you approach this in those first conversations is going to be vital. Number 3 is this. Try and have the conversation shoulder to shoulder rather than face to face. If you sit your teenager down and kind of at the kitchen table and say, right, we're talking about porn, that might not go so well. In fact, what I'd really recommend is have this kind of conversation when you're shoulder to shoulder, when you're sitting next to each other in a car so the teenager can look out the window whilst they're having that conversation with you, or whilst you're doing something else, while you're on a walk or while you're playing a game of pool or something, I don't know. But trying to talk about some of this stuff when they don't have to look you in the face could be much, much easier for them. Another tip is this. Try and keep the conversation a bit more abstract rather than personal. So later on, we'll give you some kind of ways in which you can talk about some of the damaging effects of porn and how it affects society and people in general. And that might be the kind of approach you want to take rather than, I want to talk to you about what you're looking at. Or maybe it's just sort of talking about what's happening in school or friends, or if there's something comes up on when they're watching an episode of Friends on TV about porn, maybe you can just talk about porn as an abstract thing. Do you think everybody thinks porn's normal these days or whatever? So you can talk about it broadly. That will be more helpful for them, I'm sure. Another tip is to maybe talk about it little and often rather than having one intense conversation. Partly that's just going to be easier if this is a 5-10 minute conversation rather than a 50-minute conversation. They're going to appreciate that. But also you've just got to remember that teenagers change massively. And so you might talk about this in year 9 and year 10 and year 11, and it's going to be a different conversation each time. So don't think, well, tick, I've done it. We had that awkward chat. Think more about the fact that this is something you're going to want to do more regularly. So it's okay to keep it short, to move on, to not kind of dig so deep every time. That's just, again, another tip for you to consider. The final few tips. One is to focus on the why. Focus on the why. Don't focus on the rules. There might be some boundaries you want to set. You might want to decide that they can't have a phone in their bedroom or a laptop in their bedroom after a certain time at night. And that might be a rule you have that might help them stay away from porn. But you want to talk about the why. You want to talk about why porn isn't helpful for them, why porn might actually have a damaging impact on them. Again, in our tools, we'll give you some examples of how you can have that conversation. But to focus on the why, and maybe you as a family have some values where this would be one of the reasons why. So rather than just saying, this is not okay, I'm not going to allow this, this is banned. Have a conversation that focuses on the why. Final tip is this. Lots of young people communicate through messaging. You've noticed this, right? How often do they pick up the phone and talk to their friends? Not very. It's often through Instagram or whatever. They're sending messages to each other. And it would seem for a teenager that that's not a diluted form of conversation. It's not something where they only just talk about the functional things, but talk about their emotions when they're face to face. They talk about everything through messaging. And actually, that's something that you can take advantage of, because you might find a video or a blog or something that talks about this issue, that rather than you sitting down and saying, let me explain to you about the connection between porn and exploitation, or let me talk to you about how it can impact your mental health, because I've read this article. It might be easier to just send them the article and send them a link and start the conversation on a messaging app. So here, I just found this article. What do you think? And maybe they'll respond. And rather than you sitting down and talking about it verbally, you can have the conversation via messaging. And that might be an easier thing for them to do. I've also got 2 tools. Tool number 1 is actually a documentary. Well, it's a docu-series called Brain, Heart, World. Now, it's been written for teenagers. It's 3 half-hour episodes, and it just starts using scientific evidence and stories from teenagers to unpack the way that porn might have a damaging effect on their lives. So episode 1 looks at the brain and looks at the science behind online pornography and the way it affects our brains and our bodies. It talks about addiction and dependency and some other issues as well. The second one looks at heart. In other words, it looks at relationships. And again, using science and stories, it helps young people understand that porn can affect the way we view other people and the way we view ourselves. And that has a knock-on effect to the way we have relationships with people and healthy relationships with people. The final episode looks at the world, and in particular looks at the exploitation and some of the injustice connected to the porn industry. So that might be a documentary that you choose to sit and watch, and then, as I said earlier, you might send a link and you ask a young person what they think. You might even feel like you could sit down and watch it together and then have a conversation. But it will be a great place for you to have conversation that's based on scientific evidence. It's not about your opinion. It's not even kind of about, your values necessarily, but this is based on scientific fact and research. And so it could be a great way for you to have conversation with your teenager. So that's tool number 1, Brain, Heart, World. I'll put the link under the description. Second thing is some software, which is called Covenant Eyes. Now, Covenant Eyes gives you the option to be able to know what it is your young people are looking at. Now, the way it works is there's AI that is scanning when they're on Instagram or when they're online on websites or whatever. And it will alert you if they access something that's got adult content. And you even can be sent a screenshot, which everything's pixelated, but you can kind of get a sense of what it is that they're looking at. Now, you might not feel comfortable with that, that sort of level of monitoring. Your young people might not feel comfortable with their devices being monitored. But it might be a conversation that you choose to have. It might be a boundary that you choose to put in place. It might be, if you want to have your phone in your room at night, then this is the give that we need to see. This is the compromise. It might be, if you've got a younger child who's asking for a smartphone, you can have a phone, but a condition to having a phone is we're going to install this software for a few years and just kind of help us know that you're staying safe. For me, I would suggest that it's something that you use as a catalyst for conversation. So it's not about you being big brother or big mother watching, but actually it's a way in which you get notified and then you can go and talk. And so you might be interested in that. Again, I've put a link in the description. We've also, because we're affiliates, I've got a promo code. So if you use that promo code, you can get a 30-day free trial and see if that's something you want to use. So there you go, 7 tips, 2 tools to help you talk to your teenagers about pornography.